You can't keep doing this!
Doing what? I'm not doing anything.
Lying! I know what I saw.
You saw nothing.
The moment I turned into the most loathed person in Willow Spring Estates was exactly the same moment I realized I held all the cards. $350,000. That is the actual amount Veronica Ashford and her HOA board tried to shake me down for, all because I kept up my late wife's memorial garden, the very spot where she spent years showing the local kids how to grow their own food. What those people didn't realize was that I had 340 acres of history and over 3 decades of legal property rights backing me up, along with every single deed, land survey, and bankruptcy filing needed to finish the fight. If you're currently scrolling through this video on your phone while hiding in the bathroom just to dodge another soul-crushing HOA meeting, do me a favor and leave a comment letting me know your secret hiding spot. I promise you, this story is going to make you want to stay exactly where you are. To really understand how this whole disaster kicked off, I need to take you back to the beginning. My name is Clayton Brewster. I'm 58 years old, and this dirt has been under my fingernails since the day I was born. My grandfather picked up these 340 acres all the way back in 1952, a time when this whole county was just rolling fields and unpaved paths. He poured his life into this land, raising cattle, harvesting corn, and stacking the very stones of the house I'm sitting in right now. When Sarah and I got married 35 years ago, we moved straight into the old family homestead. She felt a connection to the place the second we pulled into the drive, particularly that one specific patch of soil where she'd eventually start her heirloom vegetable garden. For 30 years, she poured her soul into those tomatoes, peppers, and herbs as if they were her own kids. Then the cancer hit, and that garden turned into her sanctuary. Even on the days when the chemo took everything out of her, she'd still find the strength to crawl out there and look after her plants. She's been gone 2 years now, and I haven't missed a single day of keeping that garden alive. Every morning, I'm out there watering those same heirloom seeds and pulling the same weeds, just trying to hear the ghost of her laugh echoing across the field from back when the grandkids used to help her with the harvest. But here is the catch. While Sarah and I were just living our quiet lives, the landscape around us was shifting. Back in the 90s, a developer snatched up all the neighboring farms and dropped Willow Spring Estates right on our doorstep. 127 high-end houses with manicured grass, identical mailboxes, and big gates to keep the rest of the world out. They started their HOA back in '95, armed with committees for everything and a thick book of rules. For over 2 decades, we lived side by side without a single problem. Then, Veronica Ashford showed up. Veronica is 45, drives a silver Lexus that stays cleaner than a surgical suite, and she wouldn't dream of doing a morning property inspection without her pearl earrings on. She moved in from some high-priced coastal city, acting like it was her personal mission to bring civilization to our little country town. This woman literally walks around with a silver ruler to check the height of people's fences, and a laminated list of legal plants that's thicker than a restaurant menu. Last spring, she talked her way into the HOA presidency by promising to protect property values and standardize the community aesthetic. In plain English, that meant erasing anything that looked like it belonged to the families who actually built this place. Her first target was Sarah's memorial garden. Agricultural activity in a residential zone, she claimed, and hit me with a $2,500 fine. Next was the fence, the same stone and wire boundary my grandfather laid down in 1952. Non-conforming boundary marker, she called it. That cost me $8,500. Then she went after the old well house where Sarah kept her trowels and shears. Unpermitted structure, she barked. 15,000 more. Every single one of those notices felt like a fist to the stomach. It was like she was systematically trying to wipe out every memory I had left of my wife. The garden where she taught the neighborhood kids how to grow food. The fence where she hung her bird feeders every winter. The well house where she'd sit and map out the spring planting. But Veronica was just warming up. She dragged in her brother-in-law, Marcus, some city inspector who clearly owed her a few favors, and between the two of them they discovered 47 more violations. My gravel driveway, which had carried 4 generations of my family, suddenly didn't meet modern paving standards. That was an $85,000 hit. The stone chimney that's been keeping us warm since the Eisenhower administration. Structurally non-compliant, she said. Another 45,000. The sound of those violation letters hitting the bottom of my mailbox started sounding like a death knell. I'd walk down that drive every morning, hearing the gravel crunch under my boots, just waiting to find out how much more I owed for the crime of living in my own home. The numbers just kept spiraling. 50,000, 100,000, 200,000. My insurance company started making noise about canceling my policy because of the unresolved codes. The bank started sending notices about liens on the property. I actually had to start selling off Sarah's antique furniture just to keep up with the initial payments. I was watching the pieces of our life together get hauled away just to satisfy Veronica's vendetta. But there was one thing Veronica didn't account for, and it's the very thing that was going to bring her entire house of cards crashing down. She had picked a fight with the wrong man on the wrong piece of dirt, a man who had nothing left to lose and every reason to keep swinging. By the 3rd month of Veronica's little reign of terror, those fines had ballooned to a staggering $182,000. But Veronica wasn't satisfied, not by a long shot. One Tuesday morning, the quiet was broken by the distinct hum of her Lexus rolling up my gravel drive, with a heavy-duty city truck trailing right behind. Looking out from my kitchen, I watched her step out, dressed in what I call her HOA battle gear, a sharp navy blazer, those signature pearls reflecting the sun, and a clipboard she carried like a weapon of war. Trailing her was Marcus, the city inspector. He was a big guy, a bit soft in the middle, sporting a mustache that looked like it was plucked straight out of a 1980s police drama. Turns out, he was Veronica's brother-in-law. Talk about a cozy little family racket they had going. When I walked out to meet them, the air was a thick mix of expensive perfume and diesel fumes. Veronica was already busy, hunched over with that ridiculous silver ruler of hers. "Mr. Brewster," she said, her eyes never leaving her measurements, "we are here to perform a full-scale safety and structural audit of this entire property." "And who exactly gave you that right?" I challenged, though deep down, I knew this was about to turn ugly. Marcus didn't skip a beat, pointing a finger at my driveway. "This unpaved access road is a massive safety risk for emergency crews. It needs to be brought up to modern county paving codes." He started scribbling furiously on his notepad. That was an $85,000 hit right there. Then he stomped over to my granddad's stone chimney, a structure that had stood tall through 60 years of brutal winters without so much as a hairline crack. "Mortar joints are failing. This is structurally non-compliant," he muttered. Another 45,000 added to the tab. They didn't stop there. For the next 2 hours, it was like watching a masterclass in making things up. The wooden shutters my grandfather had carved by hand, non-approved exterior fixtures, the rain gutters that had channeled water perfectly for decades, improper drainage. They even went after the old oak tree where Sarah used to hang her bird feeders, citing it for hazardous overhanging limbs. By the time they were done, Marcus handed me a packet of citations so thick it could have been a novel. 47 brand new violations, each one tied to a fine, a penalty schedule, and a ticking clock. As the lights in his truck buzzed, he looked me in the eye and told me I had 30 days to fix it all or the daily penalties would start stacking up. After their dust settled, I just sat on my porch staring at that mountain of paper. I could hear the faint sound of traffic from the luxury subdivision nearby. The total was hitting nearly $200,000, more than I'd earned in the last 5 years combined. Right then, something shifted inside me. It wasn't just a flash of heat. It was total clarity. Sarah always told me I was too patient, that I let people push me around too much. But looking at those papers, I realized this wasn't just about the money anymore. I was defending her memory, my family's history, and the simple right to live on my own land without being hunted. The very next day, I headed down to the county courthouse. The basement records room was a maze of old paper smells and broken promises, with flickering lights that sounded like a swarm of angry hornets. I started digging through everything: deeds, maps, original surveys, anything that mentioned the birth of Willow Spring Estates. Most people find property law mind-numbing, but I'd picked up a lot during my career as a hydrogeologist. When you're out there drilling wells, you have to understand the nitty-gritty of easements and mineral rights, all the complex layers of who actually owns what. What I pulled out of those dusty cabinets made my heart skip. The original 1987 deed from when my grandfather sold the land wasn't a standard sale at all. It was a development rights lease. Basically, my granddad had sold the permission to build houses, but he kept the actual title to the land itself. Think of it like a long-term rental of a basement apartment. The tenant can paint the walls and live there, but when the lease is up, the landlord still owns the house. The weight of that discovery hit me like a ton of bricks. If he only leased the rights, then legally speaking. But when I asked for the supporting files, Nancy, the clerk, started acting real shifty. "Those might be lost," she said, looking everywhere but at me. "Old files get misplaced or ruined all the time." Funny how the sister-in-law of the man trying to find me suddenly couldn't find the one document that could dismantle their power. I spent 3 more days in that basement, tearing through every mislabeled box and forgotten shelf. Finally, in a crate marked Miscellaneous Projects, I found it. A crisp carbon copy of the original deal, signed by my grandfather, featuring a very specific clause about retaining land ownership. While the fines were now ticking up at $500 every single day, for the first time in months, I felt a spark of hope. Veronica thought she was bullying a broken old widower. She had no clue she'd just started a war with the man who actually owned the ground she was standing on. 3 weeks later, Veronica called a closed-door emergency meeting. I wasn't on the guest list, but the outcome arrived in my mailbox the next morning: a formal foreclosure notice and a 30-day order to vacate. According to some high-priced law firm out of the city, the HOA was seizing my property for chronic noncompliance and a debt of $247,000. $247,000 for living on land my family has owned since the Truman administration. That night, I picked up the phone and called my daughter Jessica out in Portland. She's an environmental attorney out there, mostly handling water rights and timber disputes. When I read that foreclosure notice to her over the phone, there was a silence so heavy I actually thought the call had dropped. "Dad," she finally whispered, "this doesn't even sound legal. An HOA can put a lien on your house, but foreclosing over code violations in 30 days without a single court hearing. That's just not how the law works." Well, I told her their lawyers seem to think they can do whatever they want. I was sitting there staring at the mountain of legal threats covering my kitchen table. It literally said I had to be out in 30 days or I'd be hauled off for criminal trespassing. Jessica went quiet again for a second. "Dad, I'm getting on a plane this weekend. Do not sign a single thing. Don't send them a dime. And whatever you do, do not step foot off that property." But the walls were closing in financially. Between the fines and the legal threats, I was losing money faster than I could make it. I ended up selling my grandfather's old surveying gear, solid brass instruments that had literally mapped out this county a lifetime ago. Then Sarah's fine china went, the set her grandmother gave us on our wedding day. Every time I sold something, it felt like I was carving out a piece of my own heart, but I needed every cent for legal fees and research. That's when I reached out to Alina Patterson. Alina is 73 and runs a genealogy service from her home office. She's got a reputation for digging up property records that the government claims were lost to time. She's the kind of person who remembers the exact day the courthouse burned in '67 and knows which files were saved and which ones were hidden by some clerk trying to cover their tracks. "Clayton," she told me when I laid it all out, "you're talking about the Clearwater Project. I remember when they broke ground. Your granddad was furious about something back then, but he kept it to himself. Alina charged me $500 for a deep dive into the property history. 2 days later, she called with news that flipped the script. "You need to sit down for this, Clayton," she said. "I found the 1987 survey maps. Your grandfather's 340 acres didn't just border the neighborhood. They make up the entire footprint of Willow Spring Estates. Every single house, every paved road, every park. It's all sitting on the original Brewster farm." The weight of that was massive. If she was right, 127 families were living in homes built on land that had never actually been signed over by my family. But the real kicker came when Alina found the original surveyor, Tom Bradley. He's retired now but still sharp as a tack at 78, and he remembered the Brewster job like it happened yesterday. "Your granddad was incredibly particular about the boundaries," Tom told me over coffee at the diner. He started sketching lines on a paper napkin with his weathered hands. He wanted to make sure the development didn't touch his mineral or water rights. He was a smart man. Most farmers back then didn't know the difference between the dirt on top and what's underneath. Tom explained a part of property law I'd never quite grasped. When you own land, you don't just own the surface. You own the whole layer cake, as he called it. "You can sell the frosting without selling the cake," Tom said. "Your grandfather sold them the right to build houses on top, but he kept the foundation, both literally and legally." It hit me like a sledgehammer. If Tom and Alina were right, Veronica wasn't just harassing me with fake fines. She was doing it while standing on land that legally belonged to my family. I drove home that afternoon with my head spinning. I had 18 days until the foreclosure deadline. My legal bills were hitting 25 grand, but somewhere in those files was the proof I needed to burn their whole world down. The only question was if I could find it before Veronica's lawyers buried me. As I pulled up my gravel drive, crunch, 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 I spotted fresh tracks near Sarah's garden. Someone had been there while I was out. This wasn't just a legal battle anymore. It was getting personal. The tracks led right into the memorial garden, where I found 3 of her heirloom tomato plants ripped out of the ground. There was a new citation zip-tied to the gate. "Unauthorized agricultural modification, $15,000 penalty." Veronica wasn't just writing tickets anymore. She was trespassing on my land to manufacture the crimes. The next morning, the law firm of Pettin and Associates dropped a nuclear bomb, a countersuit for $2.3 million. They were claiming adverse possession, basically arguing that because the neighborhood had been there for over 30 years, the residents now owned the land through use, regardless of what the original deed said. They actually wanted me to pay them for the improvement of taking my land. I sat in Sarah's garden, surrounded by the smell of torn-up earth and the hum of some very upset bees, reading through 50 pages of legal jargon. It was intimidating, full of Latin and complex cases designed to make me quit. But buried deep in the footnotes, I found something very interesting. The claim for adverse possession was built entirely on a property assessment from 1991, which supposedly proved the neighborhood was a settled community with ownership rights. But 1991 was a pivotal year for a completely different reason, something that totally flipped the script on who actually owned this dirt. Alina Patterson had touched on the fact that Clearwater development went belly up, but the timing hadn't clicked for me until now. Sitting there in my trashed garden with legal documents scattered around me like dead leaves, the puzzle pieces finally started falling into place. I got Alina on the line that afternoon. "I need you to look into Clearwater Development's bankruptcy," I told her. "Find out exactly what happened to the property titles when they went under." She sighed, telling me that digging through federal bankruptcy records could take 2 weeks, maybe more. "I don't have 2 weeks," I barked. "The foreclosure hearing is in 12 days. There was a long silence on her end. "Wait," she said softly. "There might be a shortcut." Clearwater's lead attorney back then was a man named Richard Sterling. He's retired down in Florida now, but I might be able to hunt him down. 3 days later, Alina called back, and I could hear the adrenaline in her voice. "Clayton, I found him. Richard Sterling is 81 now, living near Tampa. And get this, he's been waiting 30 years for a Brewster to give him a call." As it turns out, Sterling had tried to reach us a dozen times after the bankruptcy. But we were in temporary housing while fixing up the farmhouse, and his letters just got lost in the shuffle. He'd kept every single document in his private files, knowing this ownership nightmare would eventually rear its head. Your grandfather was incredibly careful about keeping that land title, Sterling told me over a scratchy long-distance line. His voice was old and gravelly, but his mind was like a steel trap. He explained that when Clearwater filed for Chapter 11 in '91, they hadn't finished the payments for the land. Under federal law, if a property transfer isn't finished when a company goes bust, it automatically snaps back to the original owner. It's a legal concept called equitable reversion. Basically, it's like a rubber band. If the buyer defaults before the deal is done, the land returns to the seller, no matter what's been built on top of it in the meantime. Sterling had the receipts to back it all up. He had the payment schedules showing Clearwater still owed my granddad $180,000 when they collapsed. He had the bankruptcy filings confirming the deal was never finished. And most importantly, he had a letter from the judge stating the Brewster land reverted back to us. "Son," Sterling said, "you've owned that entire subdivision since 1991. Every mansion, every cul-de-sac, every single blade of grass. Those people think they bought homes from Clearwater, but Clearwater was selling something they didn't legally own." The scale of this was massive. Veronica hadn't just been bullying me on my own land. She'd been doing it while living in a house built on my dirt, serving as president of an HOA that was governing my property, and handing out fines she had zero authority to write. But the cherry on top was that adverse possession claim. Her lawyers had just sued me for $2.3 million for improvements to land they were simultaneously claiming to own. You can't claim adverse possession if you already think you're the legal owner. The two arguments literally cancel each other out. Sterling promised to overnight the original files to my lawyer. When I hung up, I walked outside and saw the world differently. That gravel driveway she wanted paved, that was my driveway on my land. That fence she hated, that was my boundary marker. This woman had the nerve to stand in my backyard and cite me for code violations on my own property, all while living in a house she had absolutely no legal right to.